Buenos dias and good morning to friends of the Museum of South Texas History, wherever you may be viewing from any part of the world. Thank you for joining us on our next installment, this installment of Museum Pláticas. We have some treats today that are extraordinary. First, we will have the museum exhibits and collections coordinator, Melissa Peña, will be joining me for the first segment of the show. She will be providing a sneak peek of the Hispanic Heritage Month exhibit that she is actually developing and will mount shortly. After Melissa, then, we will go on break and we will bring to our set El Dr. Miguel Nevarez. So Dr. Nevarez, as many of you know, was president of Pan American University and then the University of Texas Pan American for 23 years, a resident of McAllen, and a highly consequential figure in the history of South Texas. So when we come back, we will engage in a plática with Melissa Peña from the museum.
From McAllen, Texas, and I'm a contributor now.
My name is Edward Wallace. I'm from McAllen, Texas. I have a family membership here.
Great opportunity for us to be able to be part of something that was totally Valley.
Yeah, it's good to have something that's totally Valley because, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think there are any other museums of this quality.
When I see the place from the outside and I walk in and I have anything to do with just being in the museum, I'm like, this is a really cool place.
I don't have any memberships with any other museums. I find I get my money's worth here. One thing is in the bookstore, they have a great book collection there and other things, and you get a discount when you're a friend here at the museum.
The Museum of South Texas History really relies upon the input and the participation, and that includes financial participation of its community.
It's nice to be able to say, well, I'm doing some little bit to help it, because I know it's a huge deal to keep this place open every year.
That it's very fun and educational, and there's many events, and like Pioneer Day and the puppet shows and summer nights at the museum.
This is a really fundamental institution. It's a beautiful place. It does really important work. It's an attractive exhibition. It's a teacher of our history. You get to be a small but important part of that by just being a member.
You should be a member. This is something important to us to preserve our history. If y'all don't do it, it's gone. If you don't want to support this museum, a lot of that rich history is going to be gone forever.
Okay, welcome back to Museum Pláticas. My name is Francisco Guajardo. I'm the CEO of the museum, and with me is Melissa Peña. Hello, Melissa.
Hello.
So, Melissa, before we start talking about Hispanic Heritage Month, first, tell the world who you are. Who are you? Where are you from? What do you do at the museum?
So I'm Melissa Peña. I am from Edinburgh. I was born and raised here. And I am the exhibits and collections coordinator for the museum.
What does exhibits coordinator mean, and what does collections coordinator mean?
So exhibits coordinator, right now I'm doing short-term exhibits, just an exploration of items that we have in our collections that I feel really need to be seen by the public, but there's not a reason to have them in the permanent exhibits. So I've started doing these shorter term exhibits, and with collections coordinator, it really does go hand in hand, because then I find out oh, we have a gap here. I need to figure out how to fill that gap with artifacts so that I can then display them properly and tell a full story, tell a whole story of the history of the valley.
So you know that we're going to have Miguel Nevarez on for the next segment, and as before we went live, you know that he was sitting here and we were having a conversation because I wanted to record as much of Miguel Nevarez as you can record, the better. And so you were sitting over on the side, and I asked Dr. Nevarez, who has your collection, and what about your wife of 60 years, Blanca, who passed away 3 years ago? What about her stuff? And so we began to, you know, reflect on that. What were you thinking as you sat over on the side as our collections coordinator? What were you thinking at that time?
So my thought is always, we need information from people who have lived here for a long time, and they don't need to have done anything groundbreaking. We need those everyday stories so that 100 years from now, people doing research, people coming to the valley knows what a daily life looks like in the valley. So we really need, across the board, we need information from anyone that we can get it from. It doesn't need to be, you know, Dr. Nevarez, I mean, is obviously groundbreaking, but at the same time, we need, you know, information from everyone. And so his wife was very supportive, and we need to know, you know, how and all of that.
Okay. Thank you for that reflection. Melissa, tell us about what you're preparing right now for Hispanic Heritage. And so I'll just set this up by saying that Hispanic Heritage is a thing,
Yes.
right? I mean, across the country, people celebrate, reflect, commemorate the existence of Hispanic people. And by Hispanic, that means that whole umbrella group of
Right.
Mexican American people, Puerto Rican American people, Cuban American people, people from South America, that sort of thing. And so this whole Hispanic heritage thing really began during the LBJ administration, when LBJ, who actually grew up with, you know, Mexican American people and was a teacher. His first job was at Cotula School as a teacher at a Mexican school. And so he was acutely aware of this, and people put pressure on him to do something about this. And so he created this designation. And then
Right.
it has evolved through the past half century. And so there is like this time period between September and October,
Yes, very weird.
Hispanic Heritage. And so I think it starts like right about the time of Mexican independence, el 16 de septiembre, all the way up to like the
October.
Dia de la Raza, which is like Columbus Day, mid-October.
Yes,
So that's kind of the
window.
So tell us about what you're doing that the public can expect and can come and enjoy.
Well, let me start off saying every day is Hispanic Heritage Month here at the museum, and that's something that I've said before. We celebrate this heritage all the time, but this is an opportunity to do something a little more fun and celebrate specific areas that that Hispanics have made a contribution to. So this exhibit going up is on Mexican cinema. And right when World War II started is when Mexican cinema just really took off. They were producing really beautiful work, and they had these movie stars, these celebrities, and they would travel around to all the different cinemas, and it was just a really beautiful, big celebration of Mexican cinema. And so that's what this is. We have a gorgeous collection of 23 movie posters, 22 or 23 movie posters. I'm only showing 8 because it's the space is not big enough for all of them. I hope one day I can show all of them, but there's a lot of fun ones I'm making sure that there's some romance. I'm making sure that we have some Cantinflas, of course, and then we have 2 sci-fi ones, one about dinosaurs and one about vampires. And I'm really excited to show those because it's not always soap opera type movies that they were making. It's very, like, it was so many different genres, and they're really beautiful posters.
You know, the guy who was the vampire. One of the Mexican movie stars who was a vampire was a guy named Aldo Monti. And he just passed away in the last couple of years. He lived in McAllen.
Oh, really?
Aldo Monti, who was Italian, then went into South America, became a soap opera star, then came to Mexico City, and then becomes like this huge Mexican, movie star, Aldo Monti. And so he moved to McAllen like 20 years ago, in his retirement. In Mexico, he had married like this ballerina. And then Aldo Monti would then, his grandkids were used to dance in my wife's dance studio.
Really?
And so a highlight was when we asked Aldo Monti if he would be the butler in our Nutcracker.
You didn't let him be the head.
And there was no vampire role in the Nutcracker. But he was so incredible. So go and look up Aldo Monti.
I will.
This man was like a big time movie star in Mexico, and he lived in McAllen. Can you imagine that?
And you made him the butler?
We made him the butler in the Nutcracker. He was so professional. He would have his notes, and he would make sure that everybody was professional about things. Like 5-year-old kids, hey, follow your notes.
Get back in that box.
So,
that's so
Melissa,
great.
so look forward to this exhibit.
Thanks.
I think it's going to be exciting. You walked me through your design, and I think it's going to be so cool. And
I
think
hope
people
so,
will have fun.
I'm excited. I'm excited to be showing. So we have some really fun collections, and so it's been fun to like go through everything and see what we have, and come up with different ideas on how to display that.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa, for your work. And so when we return, we will have Dr. Miguel Nevarez on the show, and we will have good conversations, a good plática with him. Welcome back to Museum Pláticas, and I have with me today at the Museum of South Texas History, el Dr. Miguel Nevarez. Dr. Nevarez, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me, Dr. Ricardo.
So, I've been interested in your story for many years, and you may remember when you and I were at the university together, because when you retired as longtime president of the university, you then had, I think, a sabbatical.
Took a year off.
A year off.
Right.
And then, so you retired in 04, you took a year off, 04, 05, and then about 05, 06, you came back to the faculty.
Right.
And so you just happened to come to the faculty when I was starting my career on the faculty.
Yeah.
And it was such a joy to be, hanging out with you at department meetings and that sort of thing. And through the years, I think I probably sat down with you 3 or 4 times to do interviews. And so we did an oral history once, then another time I interviewed you because we were doing an oral history project on braceros. And
Right.
you worked with the
I worked-
bracero program in 1957, I think.
57, yeah. 57 and 58, yeah.
Dr. Nevarez, tell us a little bit, because there's a story about your father, and so I don't think that we know the story about your father as well, but there was a story about your father and how your father was a physician, and then your father died when you were young and you were in college, and it sort of disrupted the life of, right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your father, where he was from, how he came to this country to become a physician, and that sort of thing.
My dad had the same name I have, Miguel Nevarez, and originally he was from Durango. The Nevarez, as a matter of fact, if you go to Durango, there are as many Nevarezes in Durango as there are Garcias down here on it. It's a very common name. But he went, after going early school there in Durango, he went to study in Mexico City. Ended up going to medical school and graduating from medical school from the University of Mexico in Mexico City on it. In Mexico, like it's customary, going to professional universities and college and all that the tuition is very low. However, when you graduate, you give 1 year service or more to the country. So one of the things that those that graduated from medical school do is they send them out to the outside of the metropolitan areas in Mexico City where there's no doctors and doctors are needed. And so my dad did a couple of those, one in Mazatlan and another one in Reynosa, where he came and did his service, actually. To the government on it, and I forget what year he came, but he was there, met my mother, and who was also Mexican, born in Mexico, but she kind of grew up on this in the U.S. because she left Mexico during the Mexican Revolution in 1912, and so she lived, went to school over here, and anyway, they got married, and one of the things that my mother wanted to do, although my dad lived there in Reynosa, my mother got married, they lived in Reynosa. One of the things my mother wanted to make sure that I'm the oldest one in the family, so she wanted to make sure that I was born in the United States and not in Mexico. So she came in to McAllen and had me. And 3 days later, we went back, and that happened in 1937. Went back to Reynosa. So about the first 2 or 3 years of my life, we were in Reynosa on it. Then, of course, during that time, the World War II broke up. And one of the things that was needed very much was medical doctors on it. And this country has a history that whenever there's a shortage of labor of any kind, they kind of open the doors for people from outside the country to come in and fill the gap. That's happened over and over. The Bracero program, but that's the different story. Anyway, they told people from foreign countries that if they could come in and pass the medical exam and take a year of internship and that kind of thing, that they could practice medicine in the United States. And so my mom gave my dad a short course in English, basically translating medical terminologies from Spanish to English on that. And he took the exam, he passed the exam, he did an internship here, and so they moved from Reynosa to McAllen on it.
So a couple things there. There's a lot to unpack clearly, but in the political discourse, somebody could aptly call you an anchor baby.
I've been called other things, but I'll take anchor.
Your mother brought you across so you could be born in the United States, and you became a U.S. citizen, which was a great privilege for you in life. Your mother had the foresight to do that.
Yeah.
That's one. Great story there, right? Secondly, your father would come across to fill a particular vocation that was needed during the wartime effort.
Correct.
And so he would come to McAllen to set up what?
A medical practice.
A medical practice. A medical practice. So what year was your father born? Más o menos.
I think it was 1898.
And what year was your mother born?
1910.
And what was your mother's name?
Lucila Peña.
Lucila Peña. And so your mother would have gone to school where? In McAllen?
And actually Roma.
In Roma.
Yeah. They basically lived in Mier, Tamaulipas. She was born in Mier, Tamaulipas. A lot of us, were older, were born in Mier. It was a thriving town and across the border. And as I mentioned, in 1912 the revolution started, and so some of the people, including my mother and her family, moved from Mier to Roma, which is right outside of Rio Grande City, on it, and she went to school in Roma.
2 weeks ago, a woman came to the museum. A woman who described herself as Maria Ita Lopez. She said that your father and your mother, when she was 13 years old, they brought her from Reynosa to come to live with the Nevarez family, to be a companion to your sister, and to help. And I called you.
Yes, you did.
And so then, what's that story about?
Well, it's I think, and I talked to her, but it was very short, and it's over the phone on it. What I can remember is that she knew the family when we were in Reynosa, when we lived in Reynosa over there, and she was about the same age as my sister was on that, and so I think they developed a friendship early on it. And so when we moved from Reynosa to McAllen, which at that time was a big move. I mean, it was the difference between Reynosa and McAllen were a lot more different than it is right now on it. And so you had to socialize and fit in. One of the things that I remember even from my parents, when they moved to McAllen, and most of their social life was still in Reynosa, because they belonged to clubs over there in Reynosa. They knew people from Reynosa, and so any socialization that they did were in Reynosa, And so one of the things that happened with Itza was trying to get someone that they were familiar with from their living in Reynosa to come and live with us, and be a companion to my sister on that.
Part of the transition.
Part of the transition on this thing.
Yeah.
Exactly on that.
And your sister's name?
Graciela.
Graciela.
Diana Graciela.
And so is Graciela with us?
No. I lost 3 people, within a couple of years. They were very, very close to me, my wife, my sister, and my brother-in-law on that. And so, no, they're no longer with us.
The 3 people you lost, Blanca, your wife, who you had been married to for 60 years.
60 years.
Where was Blanca from?
Originally, her parents were from a town close to San Fernando, to Mendez, in there, and again they migrated to the U.S. She, but all the offspring, all her siblings were born over here, and she was the youngest of 5 brothers and 1 sister on it. So she was definitely, born here. They had a history of being here. Her family, her father had a gasoline station, and they did business. The 5 brothers, which were older than her, were very much involved in community. As a matter of fact, one of them was the manager of the McAllen Civic Center. Everybody in the family kind of integrated into the society here in McAllen on it. And she, being the youngest one, was the one that basically integrated more.
Did you meet her in high school?
No, we met in at elementary school, Sacred Heart School in McAllen. We both were in school there, and I was, I think I was a year ahead of her on that, but we met in Sacred Heart, and then I went on to high school, and then she followed to McAllen High School. At that time, there was only one high school on there, so we all went to McI
So you knew each other well throughout.
for a long time.
When you were in high school, Dr. Nevarez, were there any indiscretions?
I'm not sure what you mean by indiscretion. No, I had,
No, I'm asking you about this. Not indiscretions in any other kind of way, but like this. Because you and I were sharing a story about the golden jersey. That indiscretion. The golden jersey, you said, oh, the golden jersey, that golden jersey had like a cow, right? And it was a golden cow. And so you were from McAllen, and your school colors were
purple and gold.
And so on occasion, would kids from McAllen come over and would they do things to the cow?
Let me give you a little background. During, there was only one high school in every town during that time. So there was a lot of, rivalries going on from one town to another. In other words, even if you lived in McAllen and you dated someone from Mission, they ran you out because you were not a Mission boy, kind of thing. There were rivalries on that, and particularly the rivalries really, flourished a lot during football season. It got even more on that, and so during I think it was 1954, there were really good football team here in Edinburgh, and McAllen wasn't too far behind them on that, and they had a game here in Edinburgh. McAllen was going to play Edinburgh here on that, and of course we were in high school and was looking for things that we could do, call people's attention to this thing, and we noticed that there was a golden cow on top of the golden jersey creamery here on that, and a few students from McHigh, we came up here and painted half the stomach of the cow purple on it, so we had a golden purple cow over here.
That's a story that would be appreciated, I think, by one of our staff members here, Lynn Brayton Beeching, who's been working here for 30 years. Her father was like the general manager of the Golden Jersey, so she'll appreciate that story.
Well, I don't think it lasted very long, and they went back there and painted the cow back gold.
So this is 54. This is your senior year in high school.
Right.
Yeah. So you were born in 37. You graduated from high school at 16. You would then go off to college. You went to A&I.
No, I started out at Baylor University as pre-med, basically because my dad was a medical doctor, and he really wanted me to be a medical doctor also. I had a little problem with blood. I quite didn't stand blood, particularly with my own blood on that. But anyway, I did pretty good the 2 years that I was at Baylor. But my dad got killed in a car accident, and that changed everything on that. And so I dropped out of school. At that time, my dad had a ranch in Mexico, and I was the oldest one, and somebody needed to take care of it, and so I started going, spending quite a bit of time in northern Mexico. Out on the ranch was close to a place called Soto La Marina, which is halfway between the border and Tampico, on that, and did quite a bit of ranching and other things during those 2 years until I reconnected with Blanca again, and we got married, and she kind of talked me to going back into school. I wasn't thinking about going to school, but she really wanted me to go back to school. Felt there was more of a future in me going back to school over here than doing ranching on there.
So clearly, Dr. Nevarez, we need to have another conversation because what we're going to do today is really just scratch the surface. You would then go back to school after you worked, like in 1957, you worked at a bracero processing station in Hidalgo?
Yeah, we at that time the bracero program was fairly popular, and it really ran into more people crossing as braceros in the summer, which was great if you were going to school. Then you had summers that you can work there, and it was a processing plant, processing right at the bridge there in Hidalgo. There were two government agencies that ran the processing center. One was the Labor Department, which handled all the requests for braceros to go work in the fields and things like that, did contracts and things like that. And the other one was immigration. And I worked for the immigration office, making sure that, the people that were coming across didn't have a record. We would fingerprint them, give them IDs and things like that, and on this. And it was a 7-day a week job, and it was maybe 10, 12 hours a day. And for a student going to college at that time there was no financial aid. That's what makes your tuition on this. So it was, it was good experience that we had at the center.
During the summers, you worked there at the center, Bracero Center, and you went to school at A&I in Kingsville.
During that time,
You would graduate from A&I with a degree in.
Well, you're not going to guess it. I've always asked, guess where my degree came from. It was animal husbandry, agriculture. And part of the reason that, if you go back, I was, had the ranch in Mexico, and it was a ranching. It was a cattle ranch on it, and that was part of the reason. The other part of the reason, I remember going to A&I at the beginning and said, show me the quickest way to get a degree in the shortest period of time on it. and it was nice. I really enjoyed them. And I tried that, when I graduated from A&I with a degree on it. One of my first jobs was to work with the U.S. Department of Agriculture as a meat inspector in Fort Worth on it. We used to get up early in the morning and go to the killing floor, which was about 7 in the morning, which was hot and humid, and they would slaughter the cattle, and we would, as meat inspector, went in there and inspected the carcasses on it, look at all the organs, see if they were infected or anything like that. And after doing that in the morning, then we would then go into the railroad yard and inspect train loads of meat that came from Mexico in boxes to find out if they were okay to use. And after that, we went to the storage, the cold places where they were having the meat and the carcass there. And long story short, it didn't last very long there, about 4 or 5 months, because I always was sick. I went from hot and humid to outside where it was, the sun was out, and then I came to refrigeration. And for all the 3-4 months that I worked there, I had a cold. I could never get rid of the cold. And I finally said, this is really not what I'm supposed to be doing with this with his degree on it. But it was a good experience.
So you came home after that,
Yeah, I came back.
and you became a school teacher.
Well, I did some other things. When I worked for example, the Texas Employment Commission, and one of the things that I was assigned to is to follow the migrants, to try to document the migrant track. In other words, as you know, migrant would go to, let's say, to the Panhandle and harvest crops there and help them, and then they moved to the Midwest, and then they came back and to Texas and went down to the Bay Area south of Houston and did work on it. So I followed the migrants for a year, documenting where they were working and everything for the Employment Commission.
This is like 61, 62.
That was around that time on it that I did it. Again, I only did that for about a year and a half, and part of it was because I was away from home quite a bit, following the migrants on. By that time, obviously, I was already married. I had a kid, and wanted to spend more time with the family, and came back and started doing substitute teaching, and that's what got me into the teaching part.
So in very short order, so now we're about 1962, 1963. By the late 60s, you're already in Manhattan on the Upper West Side at New York University doing a PhD.
Yes.
So that's a big, because when you came back to Pan Am, did you already have a PhD, or did you get it in the early 70s?
No, I got. Let me kind of
Okay.
just quickly backtrack a little bit on it. I started doing, as I mentioned, substitute teaching on it. I kind of liked the work, doing substitute teaching. I enjoyed doing, particularly at the elementary level on it, and at Zavala Elementary and Navarro Elementary. They're here in McAllen on it. And I think they liked what I did. And one of the things they did, they asked me if I wanted to teach full time. My problem was that I did not have a teaching certificate. My bachelor degree was in agriculture and not in teaching on it. So I went back to school. I started teaching, but I started going back to school to earn my certification. And I did that at Pan American while I was teaching on it. And I taught basically for 4 years, from around 1964 to about 1968.
At this time, the president of Pan American is Ralph Schilling.
60, yes, because I think Dr. Schilling came in about 1961. So yeah, he was the president during that time. I worked for 4 years teaching math and science at Navarro Elementary in there. At that time, I don't know if you remember that when Sputnik came around, and there was some criticism that we were not teaching math and science correctly in the public schools or in the schools on there. So one of the things that they wanted, and they came out with the new math, which was more different kind of math, teaching that, and so they had some scholarships for teachers to go back to school and learn how to teach math. And so the scholarship was at Michigan State University for a year. They used to call us retreads. We were teachers and we were trying to get retreaded again to know how to teach on it. So it was basically new math. Instead of memorizing, let's say, the multiplication table, you taught math through the algorithm instead of memory on this thing. Why is 7 plus 8 equals 17? What's the algorithm on that kind of thing?
So you went to Michigan State?
Michigan State and got a bachelor's in maths.
A bachelor's or a master's?
A master's. I'm sorry.
A master's.
Yeah.
And so, did you take your family up to East Lansing? Or?
That year, I took the whole family.
And this is
that's
like 64, maybe?
This was in 64, 65. It was a 12-month.
So when you came back, you already had a master's degree.
Yeah.
You were kind of in the schools, and then another opportunity comes up.
Well, I went back to school, became an assistant principal. The year I came back in 65, I think, 65, 66, on that. I was kind of promised a principalship, but that didn't work out for some reason. Maybe a little politics played in there, but I'll put that aside. But anyway, there was another opportunity to go to Michigan State, not Michigan, to New York University, work on a doctoral program over there, and I took that program. Now, that time, the family remained here. I left by myself and spent, by that time I was 69, because I came back in 67, 68, and left 69 after being back a year, and was at New York for about 2.5 years. Got very much involved, other than going, my doctoral program at NYU and working with a particular science program for elementary students called, conceptual oriented program in elementary science. I also work as a consultant with the New York schools and also the Puerto Rican schools in Puerto Rico. It kind of mistook me for a Puerto Rican when I was in New York. But anyway, and I, graduated in 71.
Wow.
And then came back to Pan Am. That's when I came to Pan Am.
So when you come in 71 to Pan Am, you get on the faculty.
Was hired as an assistant professor and also as assistant dean of students.
Assistant professor of what?
Elementary education.
Okay. And so you become professor and assistant dean of students, and then that kind of becomes the path for you in administration.
Yes, it basically became the path of administration. Right after I came back and was hired, at least, I don't know, remember, it was a semester, maybe a little longer than a semester, as elementary education. As a matter of fact, I stayed as elementary education, but I became a co-director of institutional development program. The university here at Pan American University got a big grant on trying to develop programs at the university on it, and some of the programs were in academic affairs, and some of the programs were in student affairs. I was a co-director, and I was developing the programs of student affairs because I had been assistant dean of students there before that. I developed programs like there was no counseling center, so we started the counseling center. There was no learning assistance center, so we started an assistant program. There were no records of students that we needed to do research on it for accreditation. So we started developing programs, and that was about 1972 through 7.
So from the time that you land in Edinburgh at Pan American, in 10 years then, you're able to ascend to the presidency. Why were you selected as the president of Pan American University?
Well, one of the things in January of 71, after I've been there, doing the things that I just mentioned, developing programs and things like that, Dr. Schilling did some reorganization, and the vice president for student affairs was open because at that time was Arnulfo Martinez. I don't know if you know Dr. Martinez. He was the vice president of student affairs. He was moved over to develop a whole new area of relationship with South America and Mexico and things like that. So the vice president of student affairs was open, and so Dr. Schilling asked me if I wanted to be vice president of student affairs, and I had kind of mixed emotions. I had advised, not to go into student affairs that way, stay in academic affairs. There were more opportunities in academic affairs than in student affairs, but something gave me that take on the job. particularly because Dr. Schilling said one thing. He said, once you get in here, I want you to go with me to Austin, during the legislative sessions and help me with legislative action. I've always kind of been involved a little bit on politics back home. I never ran for anything, but I did help quite a bit of people, run for office and things like that. So that kind of attracted me. So that's what I did. I started student affairs, ran the division of student affairs, and during the legislative session, and even when there were no session, developed relationship with our Valley delegation in Austin, and got to know people in Austin, and that was fairly good on that. The other thing that I started doing was I started doing writing grants, and find out that I was pretty successful in writing grants, and more important, I started writing grants for private funding, to foundations and corporations on that, and I found those grants easier to write and became very successful. One of the things that the foundations used to tell me, well, what's the size of your alumni association? How much money are you getting from it? Well, we didn't even have an alumni association. So, guess what I started doing? I started developing an alumni association. Long story short, by 76, Dr. Schilling told me, said, you're doing a hell of a lot more stuff than student affairs. So he changed my title to Vice President of Student and University Affairs on that. And it got me to do a lot of work outside the university, government relations, community relations, fundraising, things like that. A lot of things that, in retrospect, presidents do. Very few vice presidents do. Even academic vice presidents don't do those kind of things. That's maybe a vice president for external affairs or something like that does that. So I think that helped me.
And at this time, you were maybe 38, 39 years old.
Well, I became vice president became president in 81. Yes, it's 30 what?
How old were you when you became president?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Okay, so you would have been 44 when you became president.
In 81?
81.
Yeah.
Yeah. About maybe
44.
43, 44.
Yeah, 43, 44.
So you became president of Pan American University, and then that school would become something else very short, or thereafter. It became University of Texas Pan American. Why?
Well, there were prior to that attempt that I worked on. There were two other attempts for us to join UT under Dr. Schilling on that. I was not involved. I was not around when he tried it the first time, but when he tried it the second time, Dr. Schilling, to join the UT system, I was vice president already and working with government relations and things like that. So I was kind of involved in helping him try to join the UT system. There were some things that we were not successful, and there were some things that we should have done we didn't do. We got opposition from the students joining UT. We got opposition from the faculty joining UT. And basically, what we didn't do, or at that time, is we didn't really explain, why, what's the benefit to us on this thing, And so when the bills came up during that period of time when I was the vice president, it didn't pass. I can even remember there was a busload of students going to Austin, kind of testifying against the merger on that. And the faculty too, was against it. So that didn't work out. So I come in and, the feeling of joining the UT system was still there, and let me tell you why. One of the things that we always wanted is more academic programs, particularly doctoral programs and professional programs. We didn't have the clout to do any of that. And even the coordinating board of higher education did a study and found out that south of San Antonio, Corpus, Kingsville, A&I, and Laredo, and us, we didn't have those programs on that. And so there was a big gap, in South Texas for higher education on it. One of the things that we looked at, was that we really didn't have the political clout. So one of the things we started out, when I was president, one of the first things we started out, got together with the president of A&I, Corpus Christi, and Laredo, and myself, and said, well, we need bigger clout. Why don't we join together and make a University South Texas system of the 4 institutions? That'll give us a little more clout. And I remember, we filed a bill for that. And even our legislators kind of told us, I said, why does the poor want to join the poor? And the bill didn't go anywhere. We just went down and smoked on that. And,
Who was that who said that?
well,
Was that Carlos Duran?
Carlos was around. I'm not going to say who said that. Chuy was there, and Hector Uribe and those guys, all were there, and they good message. Why does the poor want to join the poor? But they did one thing very good. They instructed A&M and UT, you guys go down there and see how you can help those institutions. Because at that time, another thing that happened, MALDEF had a lawsuit. The MALDEF lawsuit because of disproportionality of higher education in South Texas. And the lawsuit was, we got sued, all 4 presidents, we all got sued by MALDEF. We weren't providing the
Access to
educational
resources and opportunities, yeah.
Yeah, and we, in a way, we lost the lawsuit. MALDEF lost the lawsuit, won the lawsuit at the local level, at the federal level here in Brownsville. And of course, it was appealed to the Supreme Court in Texas and all that. One of the things that happened, it was really never acted by the Supreme Court, but one thing that it really did at that time was it created an awareness statewide. Hey, even legislators from other parts of the state say, you got to do something in South Texas on it. So that and our attempt to join the poor and all that, got us to say, that's got them to tell A&M, you go down there and see how you can help those guys. Now, they didn't tell us to join them or anything. They said, you can go and help us.
So you become president for 23 years. And so I'm going to try to look for a way to close this because we've gone over it a little bit. But again, I think that we need to do a part 2 because there's so much there in the 23-year tenure that changes the whole face of South Texas, I think. What you've described here is almost like political maneuvering to bring the institution toward a place that can have access to resources. Because resources means you can now develop your academic programs. Resources now you can have state-of-the-art buildings. Resources means now you can recruit faculty. Resources means now you can have scholarships for students. Like a whole windfall of things, right?
Well, yeah, and during that time, I can remember Dr. Guajardo, there was no community college here. South Texas College did not exist at that time. And you had Texas Southmost in Brownsville, but, not over here. The other one is Texas State Technical School in Harlingen on it, but it was a technical school, it wasn't academic. There was a period of time that I had 65 remedial English classes, freshman remedial classes. So a lot of our resources at that time were going to help freshmen that are coming in. My feeling was that if we don't, that's our bread and butter. If we don't help the students that are coming in, why go after a graduate program if you're not going to have students? As a matter of fact, one of the things when we were trying to get the professional programs, and one of the things we wanted was a medical school. And the comeback was, why do you want a medical school? You create a medical school, all the students that are going to go there are going to be from out of the valley because you are not producing the clients. So we, our first priority was to help the incoming freshmen that were here on it. So that took resources in developing, the graduate programs on this thing. And so it was a two thing. Yes, we want to join, get more funding, but the other thing, we need some help locally. And so we started to advocate for a community college down here on it. And, knowing full well that if we had a community college here, our enrollment was going to go down. But that's what El Paso did. El Paso was almost identical to us, but 20 years ahead of us on this. And they started El Paso Community College. The enrollment went down about 15%.
At UTEP.
At UTEP during those years. And we said, we need to go through that on that. And so yes, we didn't have money on it. We were state institution. Dr. Schilling put us into the state. And we were funded the same way everybody else gets funded. It's a formula funding. But our problem was that we're producing most of our semester credit hours were lower level credit courses, which don't get funded at the same level as higher
So
credit
when you
courses.
say, Dr. Nevarez, that Dr. Schilling got us into state funding, so part of the documents with the creation of the Edinburgh Junior College in 1927 was that R.W. Montgomery wrote the legislation to essentially create the Edinburgh Junior College, but really what it wasn't to create it as much as it was to create a designation for the Edinburgh School District as a consolidated independent school district. So the language then allowed Harry Baker, A.Y. Baker's little brother, to, as a consolidated school district, locally create a college.
And you know the reason for it? Why?
Well, there's a number of reasons, but I mean, I got my own, but they may need to be said off camera.
Well,
But the context is this. The context is that in the 1920s, teens and 20s, a progressive era in American history, there was a real push to advance public education. And one of the pushes was to create junior colleges in rural communities. This is the macro perspective. Locally, there were very personal reasons for creating the Edinburgh Junior College. Some of the leading people here wanted their kids to go to college, and there was no college after Edinburgh High School.
Right.
And so this is one of the very personal reasons. I mean, there's a story that's documented that A.Y. Baker wanted Imogene to get music instruction. So he goes to Gainesville, Georgia, to recruit the entire conservatory school faculty and brings them here, right? And so there's those kinds of very personalized stories.
Well, different. They had some needs.
They had needs. What we also know is this, that in the very first class, when they registered and started class on September 9, 1927, first day of class, there were 196 students who enrolled. 5 of those were Spanish surname. 1927. 5 of the 195. So this institution has come a long way in terms of being inclusive. First of all, somebody had to create it.
And not many public, when you really get down to not many public schools created a community college. Tell me who else did it down
there.
There
Was one other we don't know about in the entire state, but it wasn't a successful model like this one was.
Yeah.
This was the Edinburgh CISD creating a college. So, Dr. Nevarez, for the next Plática, but go ahead. You get a parting shot as a way to kind of reflect on the 23 years. And when you left, I mean, you were a very young man when you retired. You were what, like 60?
67, something like that.
Because you retired almost 20 years ago, almost.
Yeah, I retired in
Wow.
20 on it.
So you said something to the Wall Street Journal once, and so why don't you tell that story as a way to wrap this Plática?
Well, one of the things that a lot of good things happen. We can talk about it during the tenure before and after. The history of how this institution developed it's very successful. From the community college, had to go through different changes all along, and we can get into that later on it. But one of the things that I grew up in this area, and we basically had an Anglo society that really dominated and ran everything, the schools, the county, everything was, we had a few Mexicanos in here that had, economic means on it, but there were very few on it. We had more Mexicanos that did not have, they were working in the farms and things like that on it. It was a class structure, very successful, and I was very familiar with it. I grew up here. I was very familiar with it. So one of the things that when the Wall Street Journal came and did a study here and they published it, is they gave credit to the university at that time. Pan American University gave them credit for developing a Hispanic middle class in South Texas on it, and I think that was probably the biggest attribute that university received while I was there. And I'm not taking credit for this because that, to do that, it takes everybody. It just doesn't take one person or two or three person. It's a whole history behind it that developed the middle class, as the university grew. And then it takes a lot of faculty and community support and everything else to make it grow. But if I look back at this community, how it's different now than it was when I was in high school, for example, it's very different. How the whole community is run, by who is run. We've had we've had people in office that haven't been very successful at times, but it has really grown into a middle class community more, and I thought that was a big compliment.
As much as things have changed, one thing has not changed, and that is kids getting up on cows and painting them.
Well,
kids and their indiscretions. But Dr. Nevarez, I'm going to close with this. I'm just going to say, for anybody who would like to see the story of Dr. Nevarez, there is a book that has been published by Dr. Rolando Avila on Miguel Nevarez, A Life History. And so you can probably buy this through Amazon, probably. Dr. Nevarez, thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It's always a treat to...
We're going to have to probably do a couple of these more.
I think so.
I enjoy it very much, and I really appreciate you, and I've always admired you on this, and I admire what you're doing here at the museum.
Thank you.
On it.
So with that, this is El Dr. Miguel Nevarez, and thank you for staying with us. This was a longer conversation that we had actually planned for, but you know that we just began to scratch the surface. So hopefully we'll do a round two and maybe subsequent rounds thereafter. So thank you to all, and stay safe, and we will see you next month for the next Museum Plática.